Ready, Freddy. The Penguin Problem. By Abby Klein, illustrated by John McKinley. Chapter 1 Penguins, Penguins, Penguins. Okay, boys and girls, said my teacher, Mrs. Wishy, now that we have read a lot about penguins, let's see if we can make a chart of some of the things we have learned. Oh. I know. Chloe squealed as she waved her hand wildly in the air. Hey, watch it! Max snapped. You're going to poke me in the eye. I am not, said Chloe. Yes, you are, you little fancy pants. Oh, no, I'm not. All right, enough, you two, said Mrs. Wishy. Max, please come sit over here. She pointed to a place on the rug right next to her. But she's the one who almost hit me. Well, then this spot will be perfect for you. Chloe won't be able to reach you here, so you won't have to worry about being bumped by accident. But... Max, I'm not asking you. I'm telling you, said Mrs. Wishy. Let's go. It's not fair, Max mumbled under his breath, and then he slowly got up and moved over next to the teacher. Now, where were we? Asked Mrs. Wishy. You were asking us what we learned about penguins, said Jessie. Thank you, Jessie, said Mrs. Wishy. Chloe waved her hand wildly again. Oh. Chloe, you need to raise your hand quietly and wait to be called on. I'm going to call on someone with a quiet hand. Robbie, my best friend, who is a walking encyclopedia, was sitting quietly with his hand raised. Robbie, said Mrs. Wishy, what have you learned about penguins? Penguins live in the southern hemisphere in places like Antarctica, South Africa, and New Zealand. Excellent, Robbie. You are absolutely right. Penguins live on the bottom half of the earth. Mrs. Wishy wrote Robbie's fact on the chart. You are such a brain, I whispered to Robbie. I think you're the smartest person I know. Robbie smiled. Thanks. Chloe was still owing, so Mrs. Wishy called on Jessie next. Jessie? Penguins are really good swimmers, but they can't breathe underwater. That's right, Jessie. Penguins don't have gills like fish. They have lungs, so they have to come to the surface of the water to breathe air. I will write that on the chart. Chloe had finally stopped squealing, so Mrs. Wishy called on her. Penguins eat fish, krill, or squid, Chloe said. That sounds so disgusting to me. I'm glad I'm not a penguin. She twirled her curls around her finger. And remember, said Mrs. Wishy, we read that they swallow their food whole. Cool, said Max. I once tried to swallow a hot dog whole, but it didn't work. No kidding, Jessie whispered to me. Mrs. Wishy ignored Max and continued. Who else has a fact about penguins? How about you, Freddy? Leopard seals eat penguins. Good. The leopard seal is the penguin's main predator. They are very big and have very sharp teeth. They have to eat about 4 to 5 penguins a day to stay alive. How sad, said Jessie. How can they eat something so cute? It's just part of the food chain, said Mrs. Wishy. They are hungry, and they need to eat to stay warm. Let's see, who hasn't said anything yet? Max, how about you? I wasn't raising my hand. I know, said Mrs. Wishy, but I'd like everyone to come up with something for the chart. Oh, I know, he said. Penguins lay eggs. Do you remember how many eggs a penguin lays at a time? Max stammered. 2 eggs. Chloe interrupted. Penguins lay 2 eggs. Be quiet, yelled Max. It's not your turn. It's my turn. But you didn't know the answer, Chloe said. Oh, yes I did. No you didn't, or else you would have said it. Max and Chloe, said Mrs. Whooshy, you both need to stop this right now. No more arguing. Chloe, you interrupted Max, and that is not polite. Yeah, said Max. But he was taking forever, Chloe said. You had your turn, said Mrs. Whooshy. You need to let other people have their turns. I don't think she knows how to take turns, Jessie whispered to me. If you can't do that, Mrs. Whooshy continued, then you will have to sit in the timeout chair. Just put her there right now, Max mumbled. And, Max, you need to leave her alone, or else you will also get a visit to the timeout chair. Fine, Max said, shrugging. Robbie raised his hand. All penguins lay 2 eggs except the emperor and king penguins. They lay only 1, he added. That is correct. Most penguins lay 2 eggs except for the ones that Robbie just mentioned. And, said Jessie. Yes, said Mrs. Whooshy. The mom and the dad take turns keeping the egg warm. Right. Since it is so cold where the penguins live, the chick inside the egg would die if the egg was left uncovered for as little as 5 minutes, so the mom and dad can't leave the nest at the same time. If the mom goes to get food, then the dad sits on the eggs. When the mom comes back, then it's the dad's turn to look for food. Sometimes one of them can be gone for as long as 2 weeks. 2 weeks, said Max. I can't go without food for 2 hours. No kidding, I whispered to Robbie. Robbie giggled. Penguins need to eat to stay warm. There is also something else that keeps them warm, said Mrs. Whooshy. Does anyone know what that is? Before anyone could answer, the bell rang for recess. Oh my goodness! It's time for recess already. We will have to continue this when we come back inside. Chapter 2 Playing Penguin. We all ran outside for recess. Let's play penguin, said Jessie. That's a good idea, I said. I want to play, said Robbie. We can all play together, I said. What should we do? I know, said Jessie. We can pretend that the play structure is an ice floe, and the sand is water. If you are in the sand, you'd better swim fast or else the leopard seals might eat you. And we can make a nest out of pebbles over there on the grass just like that one kind of penguin Mrs. Whooshy was telling us about, I said. The Adelie penguins make their nests out of pebbles, said Robbie. Thanks, super scientist, I said, laughing. I think there are a bunch of pebbles over by those trees, said Jessie, pointing to a spot across the playground. Then let's go, I said. What are we waiting for? I started to run, but Jessie grabbed me. What? Hello. You're a penguin. I know. Well, penguins don't run. They waddle, said Jessie. Right. I said, laughing. We put our arms by our sides, and the 3 of us started to waddle across the playground. As I was waddling across the yard, Max ran right into me, sending me sailing to the pavement. I hit the ground hard. Oof! Freddy, are you all right? Asked Robbie. Hey, shark breath, watch where you're going, yelled Max. He ran into me, I said to Robbie. What did you say? Asked Max, bending down so that his face was close to mine. Talk about shark breath. Nothing, I said quietly. He said that you ran into him, said Jessie. Boy, Jessie was so brave. She was the only one brave enough to stand up to Max, the biggest bully in the whole first grade. "And I think that you should say you're sorry," she added. Max stared at her for a minute and then started to walk away, but Jessie grabbed him. "Take your hands off me," shouted Max. "Not until you tell Freddy you're sorry." "It's okay," I said to Jessie. "No, it's not. Max hurt you, and he needs to say he's sorry." Max tried to squirm free, but Jessie held him tight. She was strong. "We're waiting," said Jessie, staring at Max. "Sorry." Max grunted, and then ran off. "Are you okay?" Robbie asked. "I think so," I said, pulling up my pant leg to look at my knee. "I don't see any blood," said Robbie. "I think I'll be okay," I said. "Here, let me help you up," said Robbie. I stood up and brushed myself off. "Let's go, penguin friends," Jessie said, laughing. "Let's go get the pebbles for our nest." We waddled over to the line of trees and started to pick up pebbles. "Oh, look at this one," said Jessie. "It's so smooth and shiny." "I found a bunch of good ones," I said, shoving them into my pocket. "You know, the Adelie penguins use over 100 pebbles to make their nests," said Robbie. 100. "We'll never get that many," I said. "Well, we could start building it now, and then work on it some more at lunch recess," said Jessie. "Good idea," Robbie and I said. We took the pebbles we had collected so far and carried them over to the grass. "Their nest is like a huge circle," said Robbie. "The boy penguins usually make the nest while the girls go eat," said Jessie, "so I'm going to go catch some fish while you guys lay the pebbles out in a big circle." "Don't get caught by the leopard seal," I called after her. "I won't." As Jessie ran over to the sandbox, Robbie and I started to lay the pebbles on the ground. "How many do you think we have?" I asked Robbie. "I don't know. Maybe 20. We started to count them, and then we heard Jessie yell, "Help me! Help! I'm being chased by a leopard seal." "Don't worry. We'll save you," Robbie and I yelled. The two of us waddled over to the sandbox and started swimming as fast as we could. "Jump onto that ice floe! Jump onto that ice floe!" we shouted to Jessie. Jessie jumped onto the play structure, and we followed her up there. "Phew! That was a close one," said Jessie. "Thanks for saving me." "What are friends for?" I said, smiling. "Good thing you're a fast swimmer." That leopard seal looked really hungry. "We'd better get back to building the nest, or it won't be ready for the eggs," said Robbie. "Before we get back in the water, we'd better look for that leopard seal, or we might all get eaten." I looked over the edge of the play structure into the sand. "It looks like the coast is clear. Come on!" We jumped into the water, swam to land, and then waddled back to the nest. "We didn't get to put out all of the pebbles yet," sulked Robbie, "because we had to come save you." "That's okay," said Jessie. "I'll help you with the rest." We laid out the rest of the pebbles and then stood back to take a look. "We are going to need a lot more," said Robbie. "This is a big job," I said. "I wonder how the penguins do it. They must get really tired." "It is a lot of work," said Robbie. "And they have to do it every year." "I didn't even know that there were rocks in Antarctica," said Jessie. "Me either," I said. "I thought it was just a bunch of ice." "It's volcanic rock," said Robbie. "It was formed a long time ago when volcanoes erupted there." "Is there anything you don't know?" I said to Robbie. He smiled. Come on, guys, said Jessie. Recess is almost. Before she could say the word over, the bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Bummer, I said. I was having so much fun. Me, too, said Robbie. Don't worry, guys. We can play again at lunch recess, said Jessie. Now we'd better hurry up, or we'll be late getting into line. Last one, there is a rotten egg. I yelled as I took off waddling across the playground. Chapter 3 Blubber. When we got back into class, Mrs. Whooshy said, right before you went out to recess, I asked if anyone knew how penguins stay warm. I think I know, said Robbie. One time I read in a book that penguins have a layer of blubber under their skin. That's right, Robbie. Blubber? What's blubber? Max yelled out. Max, please don't call out, said Mrs. Whooshy. Blubber, 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 sang Max. Mrs. Whooshy stared at him, and he got quiet. I guess he didn't want a trip to the timeout chair. Blubber is a layer of fat, Mrs. Whooshy said. Eewee wow, said Chloe, wrinkling up her nose. That is disgusting. No, it's not, said Mrs. Whooshy. If the penguins didn't have the blubber, then they might freeze to death. That extra layer of fat helps keep them alive. They also have 2 more layers that keep them warm. Really? Said Jessie. Really. They have a layer of feathers right next to their skin. All of those feathers are down feathers. My Nana bought me a down comforter for my bed, said Chloe, and it keeps me toasty warm in the winter. Well, just like the down feathers in your comforter keep you warm, the down feathers on the penguin keep it warm during the long, cold winters. Cool! It's like it has its own down comforter, I said, laughing. I guess you could say that, said Mrs. Whooshy, smiling. But that's only 2 layers, said Jessie. What's the third one? There is a top layer of feathers on a penguin, and these are tightly packed together, and they are waterproof. Sort of like a wetsuit, asked Robbie. Exactly, said Mrs. Whooshy. That top layer of feathers is covered with a special oil that keeps the penguin dry. When he goes swimming in the freezing water, it can't soak down into his skin. It just rolls off his back. Mrs. Whooshy drew a picture of the 3 layers on the board. Would you all like to do an experiment that shows how the blubber keeps the penguin warm? Yes, we all said excitedly. I'm going to need a volunteer. 0000000000000. Me. 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 Chloe squealed. Mrs. Whooshy is not going to pick her, Jessie whispered to me. Remember, Chloe, said Mrs. Whooshy, I only pick quiet people. Jessie and I smiled at each other. Let's see. Who has been a good listener all morning? Robbie, would you like to help me with this experiment? Sure, said Robbie. That's not fair, said Max. Yes it is, said Mrs. Whooshy. Robbie has been on his best behavior all morning. If you want to be picked to do things, then you need to be a better listener. Now, said Mrs. Whooshy, we are going to compare what it is like to put your hand in ice water if you have blubber with what it is like if you don't have blubber. But I don't have blubber, said Robbie, laughing. We are going to pretend like you do, said Mrs. Whooshy. First, I am going to put your left hand in this plastic bag and tape it closed so no water can get in. Then I am going to cover your right hand in this cooking fat called shortening that is exactly like the blubber on a penguin, and then put that hand in a plastic bag and tape it closed. Cool, said Max. After she put the bags on Robbie's hands, Mrs. Whooshy said, "Robbie, you are going to put both hands into this bucket of ice water, and we are going to see how long you can keep your hands in the water before they get too cold." Robbie held up his hands in the bags, and we all laughed. "Are you ready?" "Yes." "Then when I say go, put both hands in the water at the same time." "Okay," said Mrs. Whooshy. "Okie dokie," said Robbie. "Ready, set, go." Robbie shoved both of his hands into the bucket of water. "Wow. This water is really cold." "Keep your hands in there for as long as you can," said Mrs. Whooshy. "I'm timing you." After only about 10 seconds, Robbie had to pull his left hand out of the water. "My fingers on this hand feel like popsicles," he said. "Grape or cherry?" said Chloe. "Can I lick them?" Max asked, chuckling. No," said Robbie. "That's gross." After about 10 more seconds, Robbie pulled his right hand out of the water. "That's amazing," he said. "The blubber kept this hand a lot warmer." "You were able to keep your blubber-covered hand in the water for twice as long," said Mrs. Whooshy. "So you can see how having that layer of blubber under their skin really helps the penguins survive in their freezing environment." "I'll rub a bunch of that stuff all over my body so I can go swimming in the winter," Max said. "Or you could just wear a wetsuit," said Robbie. "It would keep you warm, and you wouldn't look like a giant grease ball." "A giant grease ball." I giggled. "That's a good one." "Thank you, Robbie," said Mrs. Whooshy. "You were a great volunteer." "Can I be next? Can I be next?" Chloe whined. "I'm sorry, Chloe. We're not going to do the experiment again today, but you can try it at home with your family if you'd like. You just need to get small plastic bags, tape, some shortening, and a bucket of ice water." "But my mom never lets me do anything messy," said Chloe, pouting. "She doesn't want me to ruin my beautiful dresses and my shiny nail polish." "Oh, brother," Jessie whispered,